So we spoke by email many years ago when the first law came out, or the Blade
Okay,
itself.
yeah.
I remember you telling me by email, but we had a few emails backwards and forwards, and I think you'd moved from London to Bath
Okay.
for family reasons. Also, I think with your wife or something like that.
Yeah, that must be about 10 years ago.
Yeah. So
Hard to believe that that's the case. Because, you see, I'm a fresh new voice on the scene. Redefining the genre, just appeared. You know, a young man, only just got here. So it's surprising that I've been writing for 15 years now.
Yeah, must have gone must have just flown by for you.
Well, it has in a way. I mean, obviously, the day by day of it crawls, and doing any one book always seems like a massive task. But as with anything else, you blink and then suddenly you're 13 books in.
Yeah. Gosh, I know.
It's bizarre.
Yeah, and talking about books, obviously the next book's out. I think, is it next week?
Yes, so it's Tuesday. Yeah,
Right,
Tuesday,
okay,
15th.
okay. And it's can we talk about that initially?
Yeah, of course.
Guess, no way. Those that have obviously read the first book, what can they expect from the second one? Because I know Orso's obviously going to be in. Well, he's going to be. Is he King also now? Is that right? He's
well, without wanting to spoil anything, yes, he may be.
Sorry.
Yeah,
sorry.
He is indeed.
I blame it on this thing here. I blame it on the proof. Sorry.
Yeah, blame it on the proof. Absolutely.
sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose it's like the last one, but better.
Yeah, okay.
And 20,000 words longer, therefore 10% more for your outlay. This is the thing people really want to hear. I once was in a bookshop and I saw someone in the fantasy section carefully weighing two books, as if to decide on the basis of density which one they were going to go for. People like a long book in our genre. Yeah. So it's a little longer, but it's also, you know, I suppose with any series, you kind of, the first book's going to do some of the introducing, some of the setting up of the new characters and the changes to the setting and the scenario. And then the second book's where you really start spinning the wheels of the plot a bit more, potentially. And so I guess this book has some bigger events and some big collisions of character, as well as a kind of big battle, which is always something that is popular with my readers. Well, if it's not, then they probably don't want to read my stuff, because I do quite a lot of battles. Yeah, you do. But, you know, it's an epic sweep of love and war set against a background of incipient industrialization and a rebellion brewing in a nation riven by feuds and social changes.
Right, okay. And what else can you give away then? Sorry.
Well, I suppose, without wanting to give away plot points, it is the story of a brewing rebellion. And the interesting thing about that is it means that different characters start to take up different positions and allegiances to what they've had before. You know, so people who were friends in the last book become rivals in this book, and people who were perhaps rivals are forced together as, you know, allies and occasionally as lovers.
Yeah.
You know, there's quite a lot of sex in this trilogy as well compared to previous ones. Just the way it shook out.
Yeah.
My age or something. Yeah, it just seems like the romance aspect. Romance is maybe the wrong word. Yeah. But that has come a little bit more to the fore. Maybe it's having a bit more of an even split between male and female characters than I've tended to have in the past as well.
Yeah, because Savine, she comes across as a bit of a character.
That's good. You want your characters to be characters, don't you?
Yeah. I don't mean in a way. I mean, like, you know, she's, for my interpretation, she's, quite a strong-willed and, you know, knows what she wants, but then doesn't know what she wants. I don't know if that makes any sense. Yeah,
well, you know, I think there was a time when we were looking to strong female characters as something that often got talked about, you know, and there was a tendency, which I've been guilty of myself to a degree, to kind of put a female character into the slot a male character would occupy, you know. And so I tended to do some female warriors and some kind of female fighters who did the sort of things male characters did, and perhaps had quite a male attitude to the world as well. And hopefully I've now started to do more of a range of women altogether, because, you know, the books have more female characters in them generally, which gives you more opportunity to do different things and have some range, not just as there would be with the male characters. Yeah. But I think also, you know, this book features women who are, you know, not necessarily male in that sense. You know, they have a different way of operating, a different way of looking at the world, and they're operating perhaps in quite a male-dominated society. They're operating in a feminine sphere, but hopefully one that is still kind of driven and interesting without, you know, doing the kind of violent action type things that a male character might.
What influenced you then to start using more female characters? I mean, obviously, it's for me, it's normal. To my wife works very hard. My daughter is, you know, I'm surrounded by females. I've got a male dog, but you know, that's it in a male household. But you know, what influenced you to start using more female characters? Because I know, like say now, it seems like it's the norm, and it should be the norm. But I know in the past, maybe when you started writing the first law back in, you know, going by 15, 16 years when you started to write it, or even longer, it maybe wasn't a done thing. So what sort of was the, I won't say tipping point, but what was the catalyst, I guess, to start using more females?
Yeah, I started writing the books 20 years ago, or even a little bit more now.
Gosh, okay.
Horrifying to think that. I mean, they were published. The first one was published 14 years ago.
2006.
Yeah, and so I'd started writing them a good time before that.
Okay.
And I think, you know, a lot of the fantasy I'd read was very male dominated. You know, Tolkien, loved many aspects of him, but he was not a big writer of the female person. I wouldn't
just
say.
trying to think of one.
Yeah, no, there's not a lot of female characters. No. And in imitating him, you know, I think a lot of the classic commercial fantasy of the 80s tended to have like the single female character, the princess, you know, quite cliched background characters often.
Yeah.
So when I wrote the first law, you know, I was trying to work in that form and work with those archetypes of the grumpy old wizard and the boy with the special destiny and the used up man of violence, and a lot of those are quite male, you know, character types. And without really thinking about it, I wrote very male books. Sausage fest is the word that's on occasion been used to describe them. And I thought I was being very clever by having a kind of, you know, a drunk and a psychopath as my kind of two female leads.
Yeah.
And by the time I was writing the third book, it was already becoming kind of clear to me, partly in the responses that I'd seen at the book, but also just my own, you know, it was sort of obvious that I could have done better in terms of the range and breadth of female appearance.
Yeah.
You know, which after all, I understand that half of people are female.
Yeah, yeah. I know.
Amazing, huh?
It is.
And so, you know,
it
befits a book to have a good range of female presence. It just makes, and I'd started to realise, you know, it just makes for a wider range of relationships and types of person and relationships between people, and often a fresher and more kind of original set of relationships. There's just more range. And you can use the pronoun she in a paragraph, which makes it easier to structure things. Is always useful. And so it just started to seem like it was a very good idea. I mean, it was before, obviously, those books came out, at the sort of infancy of the internet chat room and the blog and that whole scene of feminist critique on the internet, which is now entirely normal. And on Twitter, obviously, you know, Twitter wasn't even thought of. So none of that existed. And so I hadn't been exposed to it at all. And in a way, the books came out when that was first appearing. And so I started to be exposed to a bit of that. And it was a bit of a reality check. And I started thinking, oh, I could do a better job of this. And there'd be no downside to just having a greater range of female characters in there. And so Best Served Cold, which was my fourth book, I had a lead, a female lead, although quite a kind of male one in some ways.
Yeah.
And with a lot of men in the secondary cast. And then when I wrote the Shattered Sea books, my kind of YA series, that was then, there were many more women in that. And it was an opportunity to kind of build a world and a society where there'd naturally be a lot more women in all kinds of different roles just because of the nature of the culture. And so it's kind of just something that I guess I've drifted into because it felt like a good idea, because it felt like it made the books better, and because it was sort of a challenge as well. I think as a man, you can grow up reading books about men, and you barely have to encounter female characters because a lot of boys' books are almost female free. Yeah, and just that it seemed like a good idea to bring them in. You know, it didn't seem a downside to having just a bit more female representation. Yeah. And so it's just something I got into naturally, and also just as a challenge I like to do different things and try different things, and you don't want to ever get bored in your own writing and end up just ploughing the same furrow endlessly. So it's nice to try some variety of types of characters and different styles of people. And I suppose as the world of the First Law, which was a very kind of, traditional male-dominated patriarchal kind of society, as it develops and gets shaken up and goes through this social and industrial revolution, it feels sort of natural that, there's some emancipation for women in one way or another, whether they're working in factories or leading industry. The kind of the shaking up and the changes in society sort of naturally give new roles to people.
No, thanks. I was going to ask you then, it's been bothering me for years, this question, because when I come across your books, the names you give to characters, they're always, you could sort of imagine them. Do you know what I mean? When you read some books and you've got names, is that yours or my yours?
Sorry.
It's all right. Cool. Do you want to take it?
Oh, no, it's all right. Someone's got it.
It's all right. Like I say, it's normal time is either my signal or your phone rings.
I don't even know how to turn my home phone off. It's just occurred to me. It's some bloody thing. I'll have to work that out.
Maybe anyway, sorry. No, I was going to say the name you give to characters. I always look forward to seeing in a new book or any new trilogy or books the names you give to characters, because they're always on point. They're always, you can imagine them. They're not like something ludicrous. And right. I just think, where do you sort of, is there some sort of guidebook you sort of fancy writers have, to this name will work or not? Or is it something that goes on in Joe's head and he just thinks, wake up one night or in the middle of the night, write it down, or do you just, driving to school with the kids or what?
I mean, it varies a lot, actually. So I suppose, firstly, they're very important names, really important, I think, especially in a fantasy book, because they're kind of a way that you can create the world without any effort, without any work, without any dumping of information onto the reader, which is something I always try and avoid as much as I can. You want to kind of communicate the nature of the world without a lot of effort, especially when you're writing from the point of view of characters who live there. Yeah. When you live in a world, you're not thinking about how it works and what things look like, because it's all familiar to you. Yeah. When you go to a new city or a new country, maybe that's the time when you might describe and talk about it more, because it's something that is very much in the face of the character. So the names are always a very kind of natural way you can inform people about the person and about the nature of their culture and so on. And I always try to kind of work off familiar roots, in a sense, a sort of shorthand.
Okay.
So the Union has kind of Germanic or maybe Russian styles of names. They seem familiar. Sometimes they're German names with a few letters changed, or not even that many letters changed sometimes. Yeah. And then Styria has kind of more Italianate or Spanish style of naming convention, which straight away gives you, a little bit of a guide or an impression as to what those cultures might be like. The Styrian's kind of flamboyant and perhaps a little bit treacherous in the way that you expect from Renaissance Italy. And the Union kind of more structured and hierarchical, like the British Empire or the Holy Roman Empire. So I suppose you're trying to give the cultures some identity in the names. You don't want them to just be a mess of all kinds of different things. You want it to feel like it has a meaningful root and comes from a real place. Because I'm a kind of big believer that kind of world building, if you like, gives a book a feeling of being concrete and of it being a real place that is almost intangible, but it builds up over time to make you feel like you're in a real place, which is safe and true and honest, which is something you're always working hard to produce, especially with fantasy. And then the Northmen have this kind of convention of they're named according to some feature they have or some thing they've achieved or some famous event that they were present at. And so they get these names like Three Trees or Nine Fingers or the Dog Man, and that kind of naturally gives you a sense of who the person is. And sometimes they occur to you beforehand, like on the way out of Bath often, where I live, we drive past a school called Downside School, which always seems like a weird name for a school.
I know it.
Every time I see that, I think Downside. That's interesting. That's an interesting name for a character.
Yeah.
Why is the character called Downside? Well, because he's constantly killing people on his own side accidentally. That's the downside of having him around. So, that makes it, that straight away is one that works naturally with 9 fingers. He's got 9 fingers, he's lost a finger. So that's pretty straightforward. And so those names sometimes come to you. Sometimes you need to think of one quickly. But sometimes they just emerge from something and they just seem right. And I'll write a list of them. It does sometimes happen that you'll have a name for a character and over time you feel like it doesn't quite work, doesn't quite suit, and you need to tweak it or change it. And then often just giving a character a new name can sometimes give you just a new feel, a new insight into what they might be like, and a new direction to take with that character, which suddenly gives them a personality they didn't have before. So sometimes they're decided well in advance, sometimes they're just plucked from the air, and sometimes they're made up on the spot and changed as time goes on.
Right. You mentioned Logan, Nine Fingers. He was obviously a fan favourite, and he obviously he's went into exile, he went away or whatever. And do you think you'll ever put him back in a book, or is he something? Obviously fans may ask you the question hundreds of times, but I know you could sort of go on, do an earlier prequel, whatever. Do you think you'll ever go back to putting Logan in a book?
Well, I think prequels are always a difficult area. They're one that always concern me, because generally I feel like very few of the prequels that needed to be made, or that really expanded on the original. Yeah, they tend to, unless you've really got some ingenious system and an idea which casts the events of the first book in a different light, and really changes your impression of what happened there. They always feel like they're sort of parasitic on the original. You'll always be going back for a chunk of the readers you had last time, trying to grab a chunk of the readers and a chunk of the glory, but you'll never quite get there. Okay, and the fundamental problem with them, of course, is that you always know how it turns out, unless you've got a very clever idea. So you're kind of lacking the element of surprise, and you're giving yourself a set of constraints that you don't need to have if you push the story forward.
I understand.
So I feel like there's got to be a very good reason to do it. And generally going back to the idea that it's nice to kind of challenge yourself and try new things. I think often, unless you've got something new to do with that character, there's not really something to gain from doing it. And there's also a danger of kind of messing up what you had in the first place. So never say never. I may well end up going back to write 15 Logan Nine Fingers prequels, starting when I was 10. But I think it's not something that instinctively appeals. It's nice to kind of try new pastures and new ideas and to push things forward if you can.
I understand. Like you say about the constraints, because you know what's going to happen in the end with the prequel. It's like with the Star Wars films, some of the prequels or some of the spin-offs, the story, and then they make them, and some of them have worked, some of them haven't worked, as in, with the fans. And so, I can relate to that, what you say.